Morning Blues for Wednesday the 16th of April 2025. I hope you're doing really well. I'm Daniel Childs. We're a day away now from the Conference League second leg against Legia Warsaw. Going to be down there at the bridge tomorrow night for what hopefully is a dead rubber. I will be recording my preview for the game later today because we can hopefully see some rotation and some players that have excited us in recent weeks and maybe haven't gained as many minutes as they probably should, so please stay tuned for that. But as I have been doing in recent weeks, and I know there's been some positive response to it, I've been responding to your comments on my videos. If you're listening on the podcast, please go over to the YouTube channel if you want to get involved, if you want to leave your comments and have them responded to or featured in next week's show. But we've got a few here regarding Liam Delap, the owners, Maresca, and the atmosphere, because obviously that's something we've been covering with Maresca's comments that were pretty controversial over the weekend after the Ipswich game. So let's start off here with Calvin H. Got to give a load of credit to Calvin H. He is one of the best followers on here. Always commenting, always interacting, and his comment is about Liam Delap, and he says, Liam Delap will be an excellent buy for Chelsea. I've been watching Bournemouth weekly because I love their style of play, and he also speaks about Dean Huijsen, has been excellent this season. He is actually a very good defender, and he is big and athletic with pace at 6'5". However, we will have a lot of competition for his services with Real Madrid, Liverpool, Arsenal, and us showing strong interest. Hopefully we can get this buy over the line as soon as possible. I spoke about both of these players extensively in Friday, I think it was Friday's news show, and I agreed that both are very good talents. There's no denying about that, and there's been more reporting specifically about Dean Huijsen since that, at the very least on the Bournemouth side, they want to get stuff done pretty quickly, which I understand because they want to prepare for the summer. They want to get that money in. They're prepared that they're going to have to lose him, so they want to be able to reinvest in their squad. That's totally understandable. It's whether Chelsea are going to get anywhere close. My concern about Liam Delap is I think what I expressed on Friday as well, because there's already been some reporting. Because at the moment it kind of feels like a two-way shootout between Man United and Chelsea. And it seems like Chelsea are already fumbling. And there are some suggestions that Chelsea, once again, they get into the negotiations, and in terms of wages, in terms of financial package, when Stanley and Stewart are stumbling when they need to be really thriving, which I just think is such a representation, right? Like we saw Liam Delap briefly. It's a bit of a shame that Liam Delap didn't play more because I would have liked to have seen him a little bit more in person for that game on Sunday. But he did come off the bench. He did have two good kind of counter-attacking runs, those kind of forward runs that we've seen him do before. One of them, I think, was well intercepted by Chalobah. Another one, he kind of gets all the way into the box and wins a corner. So we'll see on both. I think, you look at Sunday's game in particular, and there's two areas of frustration: the lack of attacking output, a lack of a finisher up top, and then also defensively, how weak we've been. My only concern with Huijsen is that I'm not entirely sure that addresses the issue in that area as much. I still think you need an older, wiser head in that area. That's just my personal preference at the moment. Terry Luckhurst says here, the statement that the owner's project strategy policy is on track has to be business propaganda, as they are proving beyond doubt that those with delegated responsibility, the sporting directors and their chosen misfit of a head coach, are irresponsible and ignorant with the 1 billion spend on transfers, which will nearly all be deflated values and a major financial loss. We are on a Premier League slip and sliding down largely for atrocious game management and team selections. The first to go now must be Maresca, who is way out of his depth when given such an abundance of high potential and value players. No excuses about injuries, as my constant opinion as an ex-county athlete is there is something wrong with their training regime, biomechanics, which is an accelerating muscle fatigue and a distinct lack of durability. There's a lot there. I think the final part about injuries is a curious one. Actually, this season, our injury record has not been as atrocious as it has been in recent years, which is a positive. Like, you look at someone like Reece James, and he actually, I don't think, has been injured, touch wood, since January when he returned, which is quite staggering given his injury record. I know he may have missed one or two games through illness or just like resting him, but really he hasn't had a setback. So at the moment, they're managing him well. And the injury thing, actually, of course, it's a positive we're getting less injuries, but of course there are specific players who are still getting injured, like Romeo Lavia, Fofana, players who've had extensive sort of long-term injury problems that are kind of undeniable that precede Maresca. It kind of doesn't help Maresca because you can't really use that excuse, in my opinion. I can't really agree with people who come up and say, well, injuries, what's he supposed to do? I'm like, Poch had like 6 or 7 people on that injury list for the majority of the season, so I don't really want to hear that excuse. But in terms of fitness, in terms of players being physically ready, there is definitely some conversation to be had about that because it has been an issue in recent years. I would also say that just the schedule at the moment is just ridiculous. Like I think Chelsea are going to go through probably a more difficult period than many clubs in the upcoming season, because the Club World Cup, into a pre-season, back into the Premier League, where Chelsea are going to be playing some form of European football unless the remaining weeks of the season go really, really wrong. But if Chelsea win the Conference League, they'll be in the Europa League at least next season, I believe. So, yeah, that is very hard to mitigate and for the club to get around. I'm someone who criticises the club a lot, but it's mental, the schedule, and I think in a lot of ways, you're seeing the impact on players. I agree with most of that first part. The ownership, the people being over-promoted, people in positions of power not being that good. I still think there is a very decent argument to say if Maresca goes but the sporting directors don't, what's the point? And I completely agree with that sentiment, because I just don't trust the sporting directors with anything, really. I don't trust them to rectify the issues in the squad in terms of transfers, and I don't trust them to appoint another head coach. They should not be given that opportunity. But it really is a mess. And we may do something as well on the financial side, because I've seen some good work from Swiss Ramble and some others about how things are not looking that great at the moment, and that is a real concern for Chelsea fans. Michael Fields puts here, why is our women's team so good and thriving while the men's team can't get out of their own way? I think varying factors. That the women's team have been able to kind of maintain what they were doing pre the takeover. You've got to factor in that the women's team was still kind of the best Chelsea team even pre the takeover. They were still getting to Champions League finals, and they were still winning, of course, the WSL on a number of occasions. They had the best coach in women's football. They had one of the best coaches and minds we've ever seen at Chelsea, entirely in Emma Hayes. Of course, the financial advantage and the fact that women's football is still developing. It's kind of at the early stages where the Premier League was maybe 20, 25 years ago, where you have 2 or 3 clubs who are still very dominant. Which of course gives Chelsea an advantage, but that doesn't take away from the sustained period of success and the good transfer strategy that Paul Green has overseen in Emma Hayes, and of course now appointing another elite head coach. Like the mentality and the psychology and the winning mentality of that group is just on another level. I mean, if I'm going to be simplistic, it's the fact that the likes of Winstanley and Stewart, no matter how much credit they try and take, have got nowhere near that side of the club. I think the fact that they've left institutional knowledge, it's weird to me, because the ownership in some ways have left a lot of institutional knowledge on the women's side since they got here, and look at how they've been thriving and continuing with their success, but took a very different strategy with the men's side, which obviously I think has backfired in some ways. It's not that there was nothing about the tail end of Abramovich's era that couldn't be improved upon. I don't think anyone's claiming that, but the fact that they ripped it all out, I think is you can see why there's been so many issues. Pagwis Banner says, so do you still disagree with me that this Chelsea team is not Champions League ready? Not that I don't want Chelsea playing Champions League football, I just don't want to watch the club I love battered in the Champions League, so let them go back to the Conference League where they rightly belong. This is in response to a comment that was left by yourself last week, obviously, and I responded to it. I don't agree that Chelsea shouldn't get Champions League football because we may not be good enough in it. That's not my belief. But it's not that I completely rubbish the idea that the current squad, in the way it's been built up and the way it's been constructed, would be good enough for Champions League football. Again, last night, Aston Villa versus PSG. Aston Villa's fight back was very commendable, and you see the mentality and spirit that is so lacking in the current Chelsea team. But then also PSG, right? You watch PSG, I've made this point before, I find it laughable when I hear people try and make out that Chelsea are anywhere close to the best in Europe in terms of just the eye test tells you something different. It's one of those consistent things of like living in alternate realities, like what you want and theorize about happening versus what's actually happening on the pitch in front of your eyes, has to be taken into account. And you watch PSG, direct, fast, quick, and constructed by Luis Campos, who of course is available this summer. And you just see the difference in competence and kind of elite level. I don't disagree. I think that my point is it's more about the accountability on the people in charge of Chelsea. I think two things can be true at once. The squad is not ready for Champions League football, and that is a problem. Whilst also, if you fail to get Champions League football, I see it as a failure because you should have been there already. This should have been the aim of this season. So if Chelsea continue in the way they've been going in the transfer window, yeah, there's a likelihood if Chelsea were in Champions League football next season that they won't be able to compete seriously at the back end because there are just better teams. That's undeniable. JNA Oli, I've pronounced that username right. Something confuses me about this fan base. We want a coach to tell the truth, but don't want him to criticise the atmosphere, which has been a problem at Stamford Bridge for years. In context, the team had a terrible first half. They clawed back for a draw, but if we want to be placated, then we are just like the ownership who we criticise in that we want a yes man. Of course, we would like a head coach to tell the truth and to be honest and to be forthright. And I think that there's a part of that I admire in football, right? But there is a dynamic. And I think Jacob Steinberg wrote about this in his piece post-match in The Guardian, that going at your own fans at any club is just a risky move and probably ends up backfiring on you a number of times. What I would say, I don't think Maresca's telling the truth. I just don't categorize what he decided to do and has decided to do in recent weeks, but especially on Sunday, as the truth. I just don't buy that. You've just failed to beat 18th place at home. And I was inside that ground. And yes, there was a despondent, negative feeling when we were 2-0 down to a team who were basically already relegated. Surprise, surprise. And frustrations that Robert Sanchez instilled in goal. And we're doing things that we failed to do all season. That's a growing frustration that's been there for a long period of time. But when the team rallied in the second half, I was inside that ground. And I, like many others, were rallying that team to try and get back into the game and try and win it. So it's not that the team responded in the second half and the fans kept on booing them. That's just, again, it's either people are not at the games or they're just like not, they want a, narrative kind of hump, to be honest, in the first half and kind of claim that is the atmosphere all of the time at Chelsea. I've always said that the atmosphere problem at Chelsea, and we are the Shed, are trying to do so much work, especially in the Shed end, and maybe it will extend to other periods and other areas of the ground. In terms of trying to improve the atmosphere. I've never denied there's a problem with the atmosphere at Chelsea. My issue is I think it's just lazy. I think it's pathetic if you are a head coach and you turn your failings on the crowd, and the club currently seem to turn their failings on everyone else. That's my issue. And I just don't think telling the truth is not taking responsibility, as Maresca failed to do on Sunday. I think, you can have that broader conversation, but just if he came out and said, this ain't good enough, this isn't good enough, because it isn't good enough. And that's, I think you're just lying and you're insulting intelligence if you try and claim, I don't even think Maresca believes, I mean, I hope he doesn't believe that everything about Chelsea currently and all the performances in recent weeks have been anywhere acceptable, because I'd be really concerned if that is his approach, because I think it would reflect kind of how he, again, just doesn't understand the environment he's in. Luxstars here, we have the worst fans. The players are young and they need our support, not booing and jeers when they make a mistake, literally piling more pressure on their shoulders. Surely you want them to play with freedom in their mind to entertain and win. That's what we all want, right? We want the players to, it's a nuanced conversation. It's not like the team and the fans at Stamford Bridge are constantly booing the players non-stop. That's just not a fair reflection on the game. But I think that it's a point I've made before, is that I just, this atmosphere, this environment, this mood inside Stamford Bridge didn't just randomly fall out of the sky. What I'd like people to contemplate is that there are varying things that have contributed to that atmosphere over a long period of time, not necessarily just about what's happened this season. the takeover, the sanctions period, which was a stressful period for fans, the sacking of Thomas Tuchel, which hurt a lot of fans, not replacing him with anyone that's been able to connect with supporters in a similar way, watching the club spend vast amounts and fail to see anywhere close to a kind of competent first team, seeing Robert Sanchez in goal. It's not just to pin everything on Robert Sanchez, but I think that he in many ways represents this current era of Chelsea perfectly. How have you spent that much and that is your first choice goalkeeper, playing a style of football that doesn't seem to get the best out of our best players? Seeing a player like Cole Palmer, who has delighted so many Chelsea fans, was adored last season, seemingly regressing at the current point. The fact that Chelsea fans look elsewhere and they see the likes of Nottingham Forest doing better than us in the league this season, that is unacceptable. There are many factors, and then you have a coach who seemingly wants to infer that the fans are somehow to blame for the failings on the pitch. All of these things, I think, contribute and add up. It's a nuanced picture. Everyone's going to have their own reason for doing things inside a stadium. I can't get in the mind of everyone. I can't speak to everyone inside Stamford Bridge. But I think that that's my issue, is that the young thing as well, like, it's also an issue is they've created this environment. I'm not just talking about Maresca. I'm saying the sporting directors and the ownership. They decided to rip out so much experience. They decided to buy a load of young players who then would be in an environment, and at a time when Chelsea needed results, they decided to pursue that strategy. So it's kind of a little bit rich for me to then turn around and then go, well, look, it's a young team. What do you expect? It's like, no, you created that environment, and people are kind of tired of being told to wait 5 years for something to come to fruition. And many people just can't, they don't have a response when I ask this question. It's like, you spend that much money, you are more expensively assembled than Real Madrid, and then you're asking people to deal with failure basically, and not ask for even asking for one place higher than last season is somehow unacceptable. So I just don't really buy that, to be honest. I think that those are things that just don't compute, and again contributes to the current support. So that is it for today's edition of Morning Blues. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. Follow me across the socials at SonOfChelsea. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.